grandmother boxes, so.
We'll start recording. Thank you, Sharon. All right, I will call the meeting to order at 5:34. First item on our agenda is the opportunity for public comment. I do not see anyone here, so I will declare public comment closed. The next item on our agenda is staff reports.
We are working to finalize the fiscal year 23 audit and working heavily to wrap up the town manager's budget for presentation.
Okay. Any questions on staff reports? All right,
Yeah,
then.
I do quickly.
Yes.
Is this an unusual amount of, after you're saying I forget what word you just used, Amanda, but is it unusual what you're doing this time? Is it unusually
no.
difficult?
No, this is just the
Just
typically.
normal difficult?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't worry.
Great.
Okay, the first item on our agenda then is to approve the next item on our agenda is to approve our minutes from last month. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll
Moved
move.
by Kalita, seconded by Chris. Is there any discussion or corrections to the minutes? All right, if not, all in favor, raise your hand. Minutes have been adopted. All right, the next item on the agenda is old business. And we have an agenda item under old business for unallocated ARPA funds, which starts after the minutes in your package.
Yep. So this is just, again, I think finance needs to start having conversations about how we intend to allocate the rest of these funds. It was late in 2023 when we found out that obligate doesn't just mean the council pick a topic, that the funds actually need to be encumbered by December 31st. So currently, right now, we have approximately $1.7 million remaining to be allocated by the council. And I want to make sure we do that in a timely manner so that department heads can encumber those funds as soon as possible. There are $965,000 of funds that have been potentially earmarked by the council when we first went through this. That includes the municipal facilities schematic design, parks and rec / open space, and affordable housing projects. So hopefully those three will be able to move forward and staff will be able to recommend formal projects for those, but that still leaves $805,000 of additional funds that need to be spent.
Here, hang on, keep going.
So we've listed a few possibilities, including additional funds for parks and rec assets based on their facilities study, replacing the Bicentennial Pond bathhouse, the AED MERT kits, and then we could always allocate some of the funding to updating or replacing the animal control facility. We are concerned about the timeliness of some of these projects, even the Parks and Rec. I know we're still waiting on that facility study, but we want to make sure that we start going over this as soon as possible so that staff can move forward with recommendations.
And just to add to that, so clearly, you know, the council's been very clear about its stated priorities of how philosophically it wants to use the ARPA funds that the town got in terms of compatibility with the spirit of the federal legislation. So dollar for dollar, everything that's been presented to the council that you all have, you know, again, conceptually said, yes, we want to appropriate money for that topic. Staff is not proposing any changes at this point. We're just trying to basically say that because of the end of 24 obligation deadline, there may be some alternative approaches for using funds that could be, or using the funds to act on those things that we can act on right now. There's no more planning involved. And then dollar for dollar, backfilling those would-be ARPA funds with CIP dollars or something else. And so at the end of the day, the council stated preferred projects would all get done. It wouldn't be redirecting ARPA funds functionally for some other purpose. It's just sort of saying if you're going to use CIP funds or CNR funds for X or Y or Z, and those things can get done more rapidly, potentially one way to do it so the ARPA funds don't turn into a pumpkin is to use those ARPA funds for what you would use CIP for, then use the corresponding CIP funds to do what you were going to use ARPA for, and then you don't have this end of 2024 kind of looming deadline.
So my initial question is, I guess, and the state is going through this right now too with a lot more money. Of the $965,000 that we've already allocated, are you confident, how much of it are you confident can be spent or put under contract by the end of the year, particularly the Parks and Rec piece, where even if we got a Parks and Rec study today and
Right, some of this
Had-
would take time to.
recommendations that we could spend these dollars and made a decision tomorrow, it would still be
By the time you
a
compare.
challenge to
it out
spend
to
half
work,
$500,000 by the end of this construction season.
I agree with that, and I have concerns about that. I'm comfortable with the municipal facilities, and I believe affordable housing is going to be coming forward with a project very soon, which I think can be encumbered by the end of the year, but I do have concerns about the Parks and Rec open space.
And so just to be clear on that, so I mean, it still, I think, could be a somewhat tight timeframe, but it's end of December to basically enter into a contract to
Right.
get the work done. So, so it does extend beyond the construction season, and that's just enter into contract, but depending on the design of different things you're doing, these things don't come together overnight.
Okay.
So we just need a signature on the contract committing the funds.
I mean, essentially, in order to satisfy what obligating means, I think
Yes.
the answer is yes. So obligating means you've not just identified a purpose or a type of project, but you've actually signed a contract with the vendor that's going to do that project, and then they're obligated.
So the CNR funding idea is to pull from the CNR to obligate the money earlier?
Stuff that we
How
would have
does that-
otherwise
How does that
done.
work? If we take money out of the CNR and it's unobligated in the ARPA, does the ARPA money just move over to the CNR fund, or are you earmarking the CNR as ARPA funding?
We would be earmarking the CNR projects for the stuff that we originally had planned to allocate to ARPA.
So
And then
good.
using the CNR to
Is
fund.
that gonna get in the way of any of our capital projects?
No, it won't, because it's dollar for dollar. The next year it would flip flop right back and we wouldn't have any issues.
So on an accounting ledger, we didn't do a mock-up, so hopefully we can just sort of verbally explain this and people follow what we're talking about. So when we do the financials, like say the quarterly financials, and you see fund summaries for all our different funds, one of the ones you see a balance sheet for is the capital non-recurring fund. At the bottom, it'll say fund balance, net and sort of year-over-year change and all that. So what we're talking about is like literally you would create another like restricted, almost like sub-account within that or sub-fund within the fund. So it wouldn't just say fund balance, it would say like restricted fund balance for ARPA projects. And so again, dollar for dollar, everything that, we moved over to CNR, it would be carefully safeguarded there. There would be no question. It wouldn't get redirected for some non-ARPA project purpose.
Mhm.
So it'd be fully transparent, I guess is what we're trying to say.
Did Carlita or Chris, do you have questions or thoughts? I thought someone.
I
Go ahead,
do.
Chris.
Yeah, I am, what was it though? It was, do we have this money already? Or do
Yes.
we have to, okay, so it's sitting with us, but if we don't use it properly, we've got to return it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I kind of echo what Ben is saying. My concern, I don't mind the moving around reallocation. I understand the reasoning for that. I'd just like to see it get used, us be on contract. I'm really kind of antsy about that. And I know nobody has any answers today on that, but whatever we could do to expedite that, that would be preferable.
I have another question. I guess both of you are active in your various professional associations nationwide. I'm imagining this is an issue, I'm guessing everywhere. I know it's a huge issue in Connecticut state government. They're estimating right now several $100 million in state unallocated ARPA dollars and potentially like multiples of that number. Is there any talk for the folks that are doing federal advocacy on behalf of cities and towns
I have
that this might be extended? I just can't imagine that
Yeah.
Congress would force every one of their communities and states to give back what will amount to hundreds of billions of dollars.
I posed the question on National GFOA and I literally heard back from one person and I was dumbfounded by that because I do think it's an issue that's going to impact so many communities. So I have not seen any advocacy from the GFOA side of things. I don't know if you've seen
Yeah,
anything.
and I haven't seen advocacy. What I've heard, and I think, people may be being a little flip in casual conversation, but to your point, I've heard people say that they fully expect extensions to be granted, like the Congress will just do it. What organized advocacy is happening, I don't know. I mean, it's not a risk you want to take and then find out, oh my God, they didn't extend it. I thought they would have.
Yeah, sure. But on the other hand, I don't want to rush to spend all of the money this summer
Right.
and in September be told, oh, never mind, it would have been
And-
fine to use it for these original
Yeah, and it
purposes.
seems to me, anecdotally, based on conversations I've had, yeah, sure, there were some communities that they went out and they basically obligated funds even before the final rule was in place. They mobilized it and, maybe some of them are kind of regretting because they came up with other needs later, but others, certainly many have adopted, I guess, the more measured pace that we have about being really targeted. And I suspect they're going to be in the same boat where they have, say somewhere north of 25% of the funds that haven't been obligated yet. And like you're saying, not that I think we would ultimately make, if we had to make decisions today based on, I think we'd make some, pretty defensible decisions, but you want to make really strong optimal decisions, not feel hurried. So,
Am I remembering correctly that there was in this final rule or in one of the final rules, there was also essentially, there was initially some like concern that we couldn't spend these dollars on anything that we wanted, that they had to fall into something that was sort of loosely pandemic based, and then there were a couple of other pieces like water infrastructure and IT or
Because
internet,
we're,
but now that
because we're under the $10 million, we can use it as revenue recovery, and then we're allowed to use it for any government-based function. So
Okay,
as
so-
long as it's not a
so we could
cruise to
l-
Bermuda, and it's government related, we can use it for anything.
So we could theoretically spend $1.8 million on things that we were already planning on doing, like we could pave
Dave.
Yeah.
pave roads this
Pave-
summer.
Well,
right, so that's what we're
Like we were
saying.
going to, and then pull 1.8 million out of the paving budget. and
Mhm.
For
put it
CNR,
into
that's,
Yes.
CNR.
and not to say we were saying it would be road paving, but because we know that proportionally, that just happens to be like the same amount of budget, that would be.
I would hope that if
An
you,
option.
if you do something like that, go, say, you take the 1.8 million, and you say, well, yeah, let's do road, but I'd like to see that on top of our regular,
Well, no, yeah,
No,
the
the,
point-
the
not
point
s-
would be, it wouldn't be, Brian, it would be, we would replace money that we had put in the budget for capital so that we could
Following
spend,
year it flips back.
we don't have to, we could spend those dollars on the ARPA uses without having to have them under contract by the end of the year.
oh, I get it.
Yeah.
So we could pull out $1 from road paving and put $1 into the town's ARPA fund,
Correct.
whatever we call it, and then
Then
spend
we
it
cover
on,
the ARPA funds later, or is that? what you're
then
saying?
spend that dollar on one of the ARPA projects when it's ready to be done later, or on Parks and Rec or something where we put money aside but can't get the project done in time.
There you go.
Sorry, go ahead.
And again, we'd be transparent. I would be updating the quarterly financial statements to, note that on the capital non-recurring balance sheet so that we had that clearly tracked going forward.
Just as long as everything that we take out of the CNRs replaced with the ARPA.
Yeah,
funds.
dollar for dollar.
Yeah.
To me, my opinion is that sounds like our safest
I
bet.
agree.
It preserves our desire as a council to spend these dollars in a like planful way based on the sort of spirit of what the law said originally, and doesn't just say like, oh, let's build an animal shelter this summer because we got to get the money out of the door. And so we'll just put $2 million into something that we'll have to do eventually, but is not something that we figured out.
And to be
entirely
clear,
yet.
I mean, there's, a little bit more than 9 months, not that finance wants to see us obligating funds on like, Christmas Day or something, but there's 9 months, so this balance, very reasonably can be drawn down. I mean,
Yes.
so as the next several months come, we expect that there would be obligation of additional funds, so we're not necessarily saying this is the number, but we want to give you a sense of where we currently are at, so you can see like the maximum amount of money we're talking about.
And we're not doing anything illegal or anything like that, right?
No, this is, no.
Just want to make sure.
Go ahead, Chris.
And to review, what is the amount? It's 1.7?
1.77, Chris,
1.6 something?
1.77.
Thank you, 1.77. And you are asking, Amanda, Ryan, you are asking of the Finance Committee, what question right now today?
Right now, we're just sort of introducing a topic. There's no council action or committee action needed. At a future meeting, we would plan to come, basically, if there's general receptivity to what we're talking about in concept, what the finance committee could expect is for our staff to then come to a future meeting with some like specific proposals, basically like, these are the things we would, say that we'd like the council to consider doing with these funds that we're concerned about being encumbered by the end of the year. So these are the ones that would lend themselves potentially to this flip-flop that we're talking about. No action needed now. We just
Mm-hmm.
basically wanted to know if for any reason this was dead on arrival, clearly we would plan differently.
Can you explain? So there's several temporary staff positions that are part of ARPA funding. Can you explain how this plan works with them?
So similarly, we would reduce the ARPA funding that you've already appropriated. It's for the digital inclusion and for senior services. We'd reduce those ARPA budgets. And then again, dollar for dollar, trade it out with CNR. Because employees, we are not obligated to pay an employee until they've physically worked. So we can only pay them through December
So even though our
31st. Our
intent
hope
was
was,
to keep them on longer,
Correct.
that's not considered obligating because they could be let go. And
There's just no way they don't fix this. I mean, if
I would agree, the staff was my biggest thing. I know there are people who are funding staff with ARPA funds. How are
Across
you
the
gonna
entire
say that
country
everyone is
and
going to
say-
stop on
yeah.
12/31?
Yeah, when everyone, I mean, because when everyone thought it was gonna be until 12/31/26. The fact that that's part of the, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
right.
And that any community who got more than 10 million, which we're pretty darn small compared to every other, I mean, Hartford, New Haven, like bigger cities got
Mhm.
tens and tens of $100 million from this bill. That they're gonna have to cease operations essentially of anything ARPA funded at the end of the year if they aren't contracting for it.
Mhm.
Yep.
My concern with trying to get contracts signed even at the end of the year for something that might happen in 2 years is I don't know how many contractors are gonna agree to a rate for a project in the summer of 2026 in December of 2024,
Mhm.
right? Like, that's not usually how capital project contracting works, right? Like, you don't get a contract.
Yeah, no.
They'll tell you, we'll charge you this amount of money in a year and a half.
Yeah, construction project, let's say signed somewhere in the fall of 24, you'd expect it to be, mobilized in the following construction season, so 6 or so months later.
But things like fire truck. Can we swap that out? I mean, the answer is yes, but have we done that already?
No, the fire truck is fully encumbered right now and we're expecting
for
delivery in
yeah.
September of 24.
This year.
And we can't swap that money because it's already been said that we're gonna spend it on that?
We wouldn't need to swap that money because we've already entered into a contract for the fire truck.
We're ARPA
But
funding.
Oh, with ARPA funding already.
Yes,
Thank
with
you.
ARPA funding,
That's
yes,
what I missed.
sorry, clear, yes, yeah.
Critical
That-
point missed. Thank you.
Yeah, that one, that's not counting towards our unallocated balance, those are obligated funds.
So to recap, we're looking to allocate and encumber $805,000. The other has already been encumbered and we might have to use swap CNR funding for the 800.
It might need to be a little more than 800. Again, we've tentatively designated some money for Parks and Rec, but based on the timing of the facility study, we might have some concerns about getting that money encumbered. So I think it'd be somewhere in between 800 and 1.3.
I am quite doubtful that we'll figure out how to spend $500,000 on Parks and Rec.
And we
by
wanna
the
do
end
it
of the
right.
year,
Clearly.
given
Well,
that
even if
don't
we
have the
know, right, even if we think we know how, the point is still like, we'll have a conceptual idea of how, like these types of asset improvements, but then you actually have to do a design specific to those and bid that work out, and so that will take time.
Go ahead, Tony.
You may have said this already, but the word I've heard is that the ADA fixes for our Parks and Rec are pretty substantial and expensive.
Mhm.
Have we accounted for paying for those anywhere?
Yeah, so there's, they're, I would say accounted for, I mean, there's the report, which we're still waiting on, sort of the final full working draft of. A subcomponent of that is the ADA audit or access sort of study. And, we know that that's to fully implement all the sort of issues that are identified.
Oh, it's Chris.
Yeah,
I know.
Sorry for the, yeah. Hear my voice. Would be a number of millions of dollars, but now the company that did the audit is quick to say that they're identifying all the things we can do, but statutorily, because like open space, natural trails, like there's no legal expectation that you make
Right.
those ADA accessible. So there's gonna be an awful lot on their list of things that are things for us to know about and consider that aren't the, whatever you want to call it, the sort of immediate, low hanging, like you really got to do something about it now. That's still going to be a pretty robust list. That still could be pushing $1 million of stuff. but it's not like $10 million.
Yes.
So I think that it's within the realm of possible, until we have the final numbers, we won't know, but I think it's within the realm of possible that all of the stuff that's identified in the report, that's sort of like the immediate high impact, do it now ADA improvements for our parks and rec facilities. Like budgetarily, that might actually fit within the realm of what we can do with ARPA. So there's reason to think that that would be a really good use of these funds. Yeah. Proportionally, like. it
So-
would be-
So I'm comfortable with this sort of general plan, I think, in terms of like what I would like to see next and how we move forward. I think we need some kind of realistic analysis of what we can actually get out the door by the end of the year, and then we need to say, sure, go and do it. And then a real number about what we are looking to offset, and then finally, I mean, I think at some point, probably as part of this process, in this conversation about it, we ought to figure out what to do with the remaining, whatever it is. No, it's less.
It's
The
805
remaining $805,000 that we
Purpose.
have not
discussed.
discussed the purpose for yet, or haven't decided on a purpose for yet, whether it's
So the
easy to
biggest
sort
chunk
of
of
plug
that,
it into something else, or whether we
Right.
want to do another round of business grants or nonprofit grants. like
Farms
there's all
and
sorts of
families would
stuff.
love to do one more additional round. They've mentioned that to me.
Right, so,
the biggest, I mean, it's been winning down over time, but the biggest source of that unallocated, or the 805, nothing has been done with, relates to when we were talking about the water extension to the middle school. Remember, we had a significant match component for that, but council wasn't
yes,
keen on that project.
That's another thing as well, actually, one of our
If they rip up the road.
ARPA projects that you have approved is the match for the HVAC grant for the middle school, which we haven't heard back yet from. So we should be
Yeah.
hearing early April on that, so we'll know for certain if that amount is good to go. Or if we don't get a grant, we don't need to use ARPA for a match, and then that money needs to be reallocated
Yeah,
to
that's
something
it.
else so that we don't lose it.
600.
What kind of money are we talking for that?
680,
If
608.
we get a grant for 680, it's gonna free up 680,000.
No,
That's
that's
our
our
match
match,
towards
our
the-
match towards the
Yes.
grant, which is
Okay.
2.5 million, I believe.
$1 million.
Yep.
project.
So if we don't get the grant, do we give up?
If we don't get the grant, we need to reallocate the ARPA funds, whether we go for the third grant round, which is next December, we would probably do that, but the match would need
Yeah, if
to
you
be
remember-
out.
That's the money you're talking
No.
about, this 800,000?
no, there's $800,000 that the council has not yet,
In addition
Just-
to
that hasn't even
HVAC?
allocated.
Right, because that you
Correct.
sort of allocated, hoping
Okay.
you get the grant.
So there's
Why is
three,
it-
there's three things. There's $965,000 that we have said, here are things we want to do with the money, but that we
It's
haven't
under
yet done,
category two.
we haven't yet done the thing.
Hmm.
And when we did that, we were under the impression that that was enough,
And now we know.
but now
that's
we
not
know
considered
that that
obligated.
doesn't work. And then there's $805,000 that we have not
Talked about.
talked about, or we haven't decided on a use for it, because we decided we would figure it out now, basically, later. And then there's an additional $600,000 that was our local match to an HVAC
So
project.
I'm sorry, but I'm still confused. The 1.77 million that we're talking about
First
now.
two.
First two
Okay, thank you.
events.
We are considering the middle school project
Right.
in the
Approved.
5.7 that's been approved, but if we don't get the
All of
grant,
a sudden, there becomes 2.3 million that we need to figure out what to do with if that grant goes away. And
the grant
the
goes away.
reason why, so we're expecting additional funding rounds for HVAC work that we likely would be going back and pursuing a grant again. The problem is, if you remember when the ARPA funds were obligated, however many months ago it was, end of the calendar year 23, I think. That because the ARPA funds have to be obligated by the end of 24, we knew by the time that same grant came around at the end of 24, like November or
too
whatever,
late.
it would be too late. So the match would just have to come from a different source
Mhm.
than ARPA.
Do we have any sense that that grant's coming through?
I don't think we have any indication at this point.
we haven't heard yet.
It could be a
So-
few months before. we know.
Another thought on this, we have in our heads this December 31st idea. It seems to me we should be thinking now, what could we reasonably use this money for? And maybe you are, but what could we reasonably need this money for this week, this month, and so forth, and get it obligated for and so forth, and just, think that way as well, so that if there is a, door opener project or something that costs $15,000, boom, that's $15,000 gone or used appropriately and benefited from, rather than us waiting for the big project.
Yeah, we're definitely not-
You're not doing
Not
that.
do it, yeah, that's not, yeah, we're just reminding people like what the deadline is, I think, potentially starting as early as, this committee's next meeting, we may have a specific project or two.
Great, okay.
that we know we're gonna do this,
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah.
We've already budgeted
Excellent.
for, okay, so does that give you guys enough?
No, that-
Are you,
that's
is the committee good?
helpful feedback.
Okay, then we will move on to new business, and we have one item in new business, which is the FY 24 transfers.
So I had mentioned at last meeting when we reviewed the quarterly that there were two areas that we were expecting to exceed our budget for the year. That was the audit and legal services. In addition, in this current year's budget, there was money allocated for a job classification and compensation study. The initial bids for that came in significantly higher. So because we do have some savings in the MERS contribution line, I am recommending that we allocate $40,000 so that that study can move forward. So we would allocate 20 for audit services, 50 for legal services, and 40 for the job classification study, all three of which can be funded from the savings in our MERS account. And we have this savings because when we created our budget for fiscal year 24, the state gave us a certain contribution rate, and they revised that rate in June of 23, way after our budget had already been passed, with a significant decrease. Based on that, we have savings, and I would like to make sure that we use that money.
And that decrease is based on the increase in earnings. In the
They
MERS fund.
changed certain assumptions in the actuarial evaluation.
Oh, that's
They
right. They went
extended the
40 years.
amortization period,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
This is what is in the consent agenda tonight.
yes, it is.
Yeah, so there was some money allocated for litigation, higher costs of
Yes,
legal
yes,
litigation.
correct.
I just have one comment on that, maybe is it's in regards to the elementary school. Isn't there a separate budget that the elementary school has that maybe they should be spending the legal service?
I believe the elementary school has paid for the legal services that we've rendered so far for the
So
elementary
this isn't
school.
going to the school?
Nope, this is just day-to-day operational
Okay.
Yeah,
activity.
we've had a number, this is probably the single biggest category when we talk about preparation for litigation. We've just had a pretty steep uptick in enforcement activity for our housing
For
code.
what?
Housing code, like
Yeah,
a lot of
Yeah,
landlord.
right over here, Renwood.
Yeah, so it sucked
Yeah.
up a lot of
Yeah.
time.
And
Yeah.
and the town attorney is involved because.
Representing the town, like,
But it's litigation specifically.
Yeah,
Not
not-
just part of his normal duties.
right, and it's not
because
normal legal advice.
We are going into actual litigation.
Yep. Anytime, yep.
In the early days, not to confuse this, but this maybe clarify where we're going legally with this, is in the early days, they'd get search warrants, go in there and they'd search and inspect.
Mhm.
So did that have to be done with Renwood?
I mean, I have had high level conversations with our director of building and housing. I know they paid a number of visits to Renwood. I couldn't tell you right now specifically the mechanics of.
Okay.
I just know that
What's in Renwood?
they've had issues, renting without basically a valid certificate of occupancy and some other,
No, without a certificate of occupancy,
yeah.
not even without a rental certificate.
Yeah, I believe that I think it's a whole host of things.
Place looks empty.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, because they can't
Yeah.
rent, they can't
So
rent.
how much does a continuance cost if the town has to do a continuance with the court? Only I'm asking is there's been 2 continuances because we don't work Friday. We don't work Friday.
I don't-
I don't know off the top of
Yeah.
my head, I'd have to look at that.
Yeah, and I also don't know that it's related at all to the Friday schedule, but we could look into the cost.
I mean, the contract with the lawyer specifies that litigation costs are added to the fees. So
Right. Preparing for litigation, representing us in court, yeah.
Well,
Okay.
hopefully that gets resolved soon.
Well, there seems to be quite a few things that need to be resolved.
Yeah, I mean, there's, and it's not just that particular property owner. So, yeah, we're trying to find a resolution on all fronts.
Okay, it might be helpful if we're incurring this amount of litigation costs for Kevin to come and give us an update on all the different pending pieces of litigation
Yeah.
in executive session for the
Agreed.
council.
That's
This seems like an abnormal amount of litigation costs.
That's a sort of standard practice at some points during the year. We
Yeah.
haven't done it in a while.
He usually does it when there's a resolution he needs some advice on, a settlement or something like that, and we're not there yet, but given if we've got a number of things pending, it would be good.
No, and you've got 3 new members. I have no idea about any of the things he's working on.
Okay, is there any other discussion about the adjustments? Carlita?
Yes, so if I'm understanding correctly, they're basically looking for us, since we've gone over this before, you're looking for a motion for us to recommend to the town council to approve these budget transfers and so forth. Is that correct? That's what we're
Correct.
doing right now, right?
Motion's in there too. isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. The motion is on the last page of our packet.
If I remember correctly, that was a wash on that
Yep.
consent.
Yeah.
agenda. Even.
Yep.
So if anyone would like to make the
I was gonna
motion,
say, Carlita, would you like to make the motion? I've got
Okay,
it here if you don't.
I can if you would like.
I think it'd
Move,
be great if you did.
move effective, what is it, March 11, 2024, to recommend that the town council approve the budget transfers and increase to capital project as presented.
I'll second it.
is there any other discussion on it? All right, all in favor, raise your hand. Okay. Well, then, is there any other business or future agenda items? All right, then a motion to adjourn is in order.
I move we adjourn.
Moved by Chris, second by
Second.
Kalita. We are adjourned. 6:06.
And-